He broke up with me at breakfast. You've always supported me, and I'll always be grateful to you for that. But I'm moving in a different direction. We're not compatible anymore. He said it as casually as someone declining toast. I sat across from him in stunned silence, still holding my coffee, steam rising between us like the final breath of a dying thing. There were no fights, no long talks, no warnings. Just that, a quiet, clean break after 6 years. I remember thinking how absurd it was that he couldn't even wait until after the meal. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I nodded, left my food untouched, and walked out of the cafe into the pale morning light with a strange sort of calm washing over me. Not peace. Not anger. Just clarity. Let me tell you how we got here. Mark and I met in college. He was majoring in business management. Big dreams, loud energy, always pitching ideas like he was already on the cover of Forbes. I was quieter, more focused. I studied linguistics and took freelance translation gigs on the side. That wasn't glamorous, but it paid. When we started dating, we were that typical, opposites attract, couple. He brought the vision, I brought the structure. And as his ideas grew bigger, so did my involvement. While he mapped out his imaginary companies, I was covering rent. He wanted to go to an expensive seminar. I picked up extra shifts at the diner. He needed a new laptop to run his business plan. I bought it with my savings. When he finally registered his consulting firm, he couldn't afford legal help. So I learned how to draft contracts. When he got his first client, he froze during his pitch. I rewrote it, rehearsed it with him, stood by the door like a silent coach. I helped build his brand. Reworked his website. Edited his emails. Found his first 3 clients through friends of mine. I even helped negotiate his rates. All while working 2 jobs, because someone had to keep the lights on. It wasn't that I didn't have my own ambitions. I did. But he had a dream that needed wings, and I believed in him. I truly believed that what we were building was ours. That his success would one day be our success. So I let my plans wait. When he moved into a real office, I brought coffee and helped him paint the walls on a Sunday morning. When he hired his first assistant, I was the one who helped write the job post. When he landed his first big client, I made dinner reservations and celebrated like it was both our victory. Because in my mind, it was. Looking back, I can't say there weren't signs. The way he started saying, I, instead of, we. How my suggestions were suddenly met with condescension. How I stopped being his partner and started being a convenience. But love can make you deaf. He got sleeker. Sharper. New suits. A new car. And then, eventually, a new woman. I didn't know about her at the time. I found out later. What I knew that morning, when he broke up with me over eggs and coffee, was that something inside me had shifted. There was no screaming. No sobbing. Just the slow, deliberate realization that I had been written out of my own story. In the days that followed, I stayed quiet. I didn't text him. Didn't call. Didn't update my friends or family about the breakup. I went to work, kept my head down, and started putting the pieces together. Not the pieces of my broken heart, but the puzzle of what I had given him, and what I could take back. It started one evening when I opened my laptop and pulled up an old folder labeled Mark_biz. I hadn't looked at it in months, maybe even a year. It held everything: proposals I'd written, spreadsheets I'd created, templates I'd designed for him back when we thought we were building something together. As I scrolled through, I realized just how much of his business had my fingerprints on it. Not metaphorically. Literally. Documents with my name as the preparer. My email address used for client communication. Even digital signatures from me on early agreements. It wasn't just emotional investment. It was labor. Hours. Sweat. And money. I opened my banking app and started pulling up transaction history. Payment for his registration fees. His first company domain. The coffee shop meetings I paid for, marked innocently as business chats. The $1,800 I had transferred to cover his tax filing that first year because he was too stressed to handle it himself. Every receipt, every timestamp, every contribution. I built a timeline. Then came the messages. Screenshots from our old chats where he said things like, "We're in this together," and "I couldn't do this without you." I remembered one night when he was on the verge of giving up. I stayed up with him until 3 a.m., reworking a presentation slide by slide, just so he wouldn't walk away from it all. And the voice memos. Oh, the voice memos. He used to send them on the go. Quick updates. Ramblings. And in more than a few, he said versions of the same thing. "Rachel, this whole thing only exists because of you." I created a master folder. Backed it up to the cloud and an external drive. Then I sat in my kitchen, staring at the folder name, Rachel_claim. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to destroy him. But I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't contributed. I wasn't going to let him rewrite the history that I had built with my own hands. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, someone a former client of mine had used during a messy intellectual property case. Her name was Evelyn. When we met, she listened without interrupting. Took notes. Asked sharp questions. She didn't react emotionally, but I could tell she understood the shape of what I had gone through. When I finished laying it all out, she looked at me and said, "You're not the first woman I've met who helped build something only to be erased from the story. But you kept records. That makes this different. You have a case." We filed a legal claim for my contributions, unpaid labor, financial support, intellectual involvement. We were deliberate and precise. No threats. No public drama. Just facts. I still hadn't heard from Mark. 2 weeks later, Evelyn forwarded me an email from his counsel. He had been surprised by the filing. Claimed it was out of character for me. Accused me of being vindictive. That made me smile. Because what he really meant was, he didn't think I'd ever stand up for myself. He thought I'd stay quiet. That I'd fade into the background like some discarded chapter of his origin story. But I had learned something in those sleepless nights and quiet days. I wasn't a footnote. I was the foundation. A few months after we filed the claim, Mark was officially served. I wasn't there to see his reaction, but I imagined it clearly, his perfectly polished image cracking, just for a moment, when he saw the envelope with my name printed on it. There was no escaping it now. No deleting a text, ghosting a call, or brushing it off as a phase. It was real. On paper. And it had weight. He had two options, fight it in court or settle. If he fought, every detail would become public record. Every transfer, every message, every voice memo. His clients could request documentation. His partners would see how the foundation of his independent success was tangled with mine. He'd risk credibility, reputation, maybe even more if the court ruled against him. If he settled, he could pay quietly. Clean up the mess. Move forward without public scrutiny. No headlines. No court dates. Just a check. He chose the second option. The payout wasn't massive, but it wasn't small either. It was enough to delay the office expansion he had planned. He sold his new car within a week. Backed out of a speaking engagement in Boston, citing financial restructuring. His assistant updated their investor report to reflect a temporary reallocation of resources. Behind those careful phrases was the truth: I had taken back what was mine. A few days after the settlement went through, I received a message from him. Not a phone call. Not an apology. Just a short, clipped text. You blindsided me. We could have just talked. I read it once, then again. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Talking had been an option when he walked away from that breakfast table. Talking had been an option for 6 years. He hadn't wanted to talk. He'd wanted to take. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing little shifts. Mutual acquaintances stopped mentioning his name. Some who once praised him openly now avoided the subject altogether. I wasn't interested in gossip, but it wasn't hard to piece things together. He was no longer untouchable. There was a pause now when people said his name. A memory, maybe, of how quickly the narrative had shifted. And me? I wasn't vengeful. But I was steady. I used a portion of the settlement to take a certification course I'd been eyeing for years, technical and legal translation. Then I quietly began taking new clients, building something modest but mine. A small agency. One I named with care, Foundation Language Services. I worked from home. Drank my coffee in peace. Set my hours. Wrote my own contracts. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. But it was mine. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I would think about Mark. Not with longing. With distance. Like recalling a person from a dream. The kind of dream that feels so vivid in the moment but vanishes as soon as you open your eyes. He had wanted to rewrite the story. Cast himself as the self-made man. He had forgotten that I wrote the first chapters with him. But I hadn't. Life didn't transform overnight. There were no fireworks, no cinematic montage of success. But there was progress, measured, intentional, and mine. The first week after the settlement, I bought a whiteboard. Just a cheap one from an office supply store. I mounted it on the wall above my desk and wrote one phrase at the top in thick, black letters: build only what builds you. It became my compass. Every job I took, every client I considered, every hour I worked had to fit that rule. I used the rest of the settlement money to rent a tiny co-working space 2 days a week. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to reclaim the feeling of showing up somewhere with purpose, for myself this time. Not to support someone else's dream. My first few clients came from referrals. One was a law firm that needed help translating international contracts. Another was a publishing house expanding into bilingual children's books. The work was varied, steady, and oddly satisfying. Every invoice I sent out, every hour I logged, was a quiet declaration: I am not a stepping stone. Outside of work, I rebuilt my routines. I started going on morning walks again, something I had dropped years ago. I deleted the apps that tethered me to people I didn't want to think about anymore. I replaced late-night overthinking with novels and tea. I didn't become a new person. I became the version of myself I would have been if I had never paused everything for someone else. One afternoon, a mutual acquaintance emailed me. She said Mark had recently applied to speak at a regional leadership event but had been quietly passed over. He's still doing okay, she added. But, you know. Not the golden boy anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had no interest in keeping tabs on his journey. He had made his choices. And so had I. Some nights I would look back, not in regret, but in recognition. 6 years of my life had gone into a foundation that someone else thought they could build over without acknowledgement. But I had excavated it, brick by brick, and rebuilt something stronger. One morning, nearly a year after that breakfast goodbye, I got an email. It was from Mark. No subject line. Just a message that read: I drove past the old office today. Thought of you. I hope you're doing well. I stared at the screen for a moment, not out of emotion, but out of something closer to detachment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't moved. I was indifferent. It had taken me nearly a year to arrive at that silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the kind that comes after a storm when the air finally clears. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned back to the project I was working on, a multilingual website for a nonprofit helping women return to the workforce. It was meaningful work. And it had nothing to do with him. That evening, I stood in the kitchen, cooking dinner with the radio playing softly in the background. The lights were warm. My inbox was full. My schedule was mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone.